So this video is probably not applicable to everyone, but I have a few of my friends that are looking to buy their first firearm. And in this case, several of them are actually looking to make the .22 rifle their first firearm. And so they've had some questions, and I thought I could answer their questions all at once with just a brief video, hopefully brief. But perhaps there's others that have similar questions, and maybe this will be helpful to you as well. So if you come to me and say, hey, I'm looking to buy a .22 rifle, what do I need to know? I would have three basic questions that I would probably ask you, and then there are some subpoints to help you understand the different types of .22 rifles that are out there to help you answer those first three questions. So the first thing I'd want to know is, what do you plan to use the rifle for? Just plinking tin cans in the backyard? Great. Or are you looking to do bench rest stuff in the future? Are you looking for something just to train with because you're looking to buy a centerfire rifle in the future to do some hunting? Or, what is the purpose of it? Now, just assuming that's probably general plinking in the backyard, because at least a couple of my friends that are looking to buy their first rifle, that's what they're looking for, something to plink in the backyard. The next thing I would ask is, what's your budget? So are we trying to use $150 to buy a .22 rifle? And something like this would definitely be doable for $150, or maybe even less if you find the right one. Or you're looking more like $600, and this is something I want to keep a while and I want something nice, so that may change my recommendation. And then finally, are you looking just something new because you want current production, or are you looking used, something that's current production but you're used so that maybe you can save a few dollars? Or you're looking used because you want something like this. You like the older things. You want wood, and you want things that were made in the 50s and 60s, and that's just kind of your style. There are choices for that, and so we'll talk through that. So to help you actually understand a little bit more about .22 rifles, and again, this is a very high-level overview, but it might help you to better answer these first three questions that I've presented to you. And so the question is, how do you want to sight, or how do you want to line up your firearm with your target? Do you want to use open sights where you have kind of a notch in the back? So this is, I don't know if you can see that, perhaps there's kind of a notch here in the back, and it lines up with the post at the front, and you line those two up with your target, press the trigger, and hopefully hit what you intended to hit. Or are you looking for something that is a scope? So in a scope, this is something that is magnified, so it helps aging eyes perhaps, or to do more accurate precision shooting perhaps. It has a crosshair in the middle of it, and then it's magnified. Most of them these days will have some sort of zoom, so you can zoom in or out magnification to help you see the target better. Do you want something like that? Or even something that's a dot sight, something that it just puts a dot in a little window, and when that red dot is lined up with your target, press the trigger and you should be hitting what that red dot is setting on top of. So I said all that because some can do both. It could have open sights, and then perhaps even put a dot sight or a scope on it if you wanted to. But some, especially if you're going older, used firearms are one or the other. So this is an old Winchester 67A. This was my grandfather's rifle. He bought it in the 70s at a pawn shop for like $20. And these days you can pick this up anywhere from $100 to $150. But it can only do open sights. There is no rail or no tapped and drilled so that you could put some sort of plate and mount a scope on it. That's not an option with this sort of rifle. It is only going to be open sights. There's no other choice. However, something very common like a Ruger, or not a Ruger, but a Marlin Model 60, you can see perhaps you have the sights here, your open sights, but it also has a rail called a rimfire rail or dovetail rail that would allow you to mount some scope, a scope or dot sight at the rear of that. Same way with this Ruger 1022. So you can see it already has a scope on it, but this was the original barrel that was on there. So it had open sights, but it has the ability, it's already drilled and tapped to put a rail at the top, and then that allows these scope mounts to kind of clip or fasten to this rail that's on there. So knowing what you want to do with the rifle may help you decide which type of rifle you're looking at. So do I want scope? Do I want some sort of electronic dot sight, or am I just open sights only? Or I don't know yet, so I want something that can do it all in case I change my mind. And so that's where a lot of us fit in that. The other thing that we have to talk about is, do you want something that is single shot or is a repeater? So single shot means that I can only take, it doesn't hold any extra ammo. I take one round, place it in, and then close the bolt. When I fire and press the trigger, pull this bolt back, it ejects that spent casing. I have to manually grab another round, place it in, and then close the bolt. So that's your single shot. This is, I think, probably from about the 50s, late 50s, perhaps. And so just going through the woods, shooting squirrels, got a pocket full of 22 rounds, and then replace after you fired. So that is one option, and that's the single shot, or a repeater. And there are a couple different types of repeaters. So this is a Marlin Model 60, and so this is a semi-automatic, and so every time I press the trigger, the action cycles, closes the bolt, picks up a new 22 round, chambers it, and then when I pull the trigger again, it fires and then repeats that action. The bolt goes back, automatically closes again, I pull the trigger. There are a couple of different options. So this one feeds all of your extra rounds that are waiting to be shot in what's called a tube magazine. And so I drop 22 rounds in there, it fills up, I close this long rod, and I believe this holds about 13 or 14 rounds. And so I pull the trigger, release, pull the trigger, and it keeps shooting until I run out. Now, there is another option, those that have a bolt, and so you have to manually open and close a bolt instead of being semi-automatic. Hope that makes sense. Throwing a lot at you if you're not familiar with that. The other shot for a semi-automatic repeating firearm is something that has a magazine, a detachable magazine. So this is a Ruger 1022, and it has a magazine. Put 10 rounds in here, and then when we're ready to shoot, push that in, pull the bolt back, release, it loads one, and now every time I pull the trigger, it fires, and when I release, pull the trigger again, it's going to fire again. So that's the basics of some things to consider. All right. Now I've kind of already alluded to it, but let's go back over that. So again, I can have single shot, I can have a repeater, so it has a detachable magazine at the bottom, or it has some sort of tube magazine. Now, I didn't show you an example because I don't currently have an example, but it could be that it has a magazine, but it has a bolt, something similar to this. So you pull it back, it would eject the spent casing out, and another fresh 22 round would kind of pop up, and when you close the bolt, it would load the next round. So that's like a repeating bolt action rifle versus semi-automatic, which automatically reloads. You pull the trigger, release, it's already reloaded the next round for you. So hopefully that makes sense. There are two choices for just general plinking that immediately come to mind for me. Again, unless you're just looking for something older and because you just like older things, or a lot of things are just plastic stocks. You know, they don't come with wood much anymore. So sometimes if you want that, you go older. Now, this is one of the most common 22s ever produced, like mass produced. There are so many of these. This is a Marlin Model 60. And again, semi-automatic. So every time you pull the trigger, this bolt's automatically going to come back, eject the spent casing, close, and load the next round. And so again, I believe this is 13 or 14 rounds that it holds in this tube magazine that you see here. There were somewhere around 10 or 11 million of these produced from the I believe it was 1960, which is probably why it has the Model 60 in its name, Marlin Model 60. But they actually discontinued this in about 2020. This is a great shooting gun. It's very accurate. It's actually more accurate, at least in the examples that I have, versus the one that I would probably recommend to you, which is the Ruger 1022, but getting ahead of myself. Marlin Model 60, again, not in production, so you're going to be buying used, but I have seen these regularly, pick them up for 200, two and a quarter, 250. So they're fairly inexpensive, pretty accurate right out of the box without having to do anything to them. And so that is good because there's not a lot of aftermarket parts. If you decide, I don't like this trigger, I want a different kind of trigger, or there's just not a lot of choices, even of a stock. I want some sort of different stock. There's not a lot of other makers of stocks for Marlin 60s on the market. But again, right out of the box, this does everything pretty well. It's pretty accurate. It's an auto loader, so it's just great for plinking. Can hold a scope if you want to. Has open sights on it. It is a good choice. But again, you're going to be buying used now. The other option, usually my top two choices, Marlin Model 60 or Ruger 1022. And this Ruger 1022 did not come like this. This was actually one from the 70s. This was not silver at the beginning. I actually painted it. Don't recommend that. It's just that it was already well loved before I got it and needed some sort of attention, so I painted that. Turned out pretty well for me. Also, it came with this barrel from the 70s, well used, and so I put a different barrel on it. And so this is more of what they call a bull barrel, but it's steel in the middle, aluminum on the outside, so it's pretty light. You can see that this barrel then doesn't have my open sights on it, so now I have to use a scope or some sort of dot sight on here mounted to this rail that I have mounted right here. So that didn't come with this stock, it came with the wood stock, so now I've got a different stock on that. So you're probably already hearing one of the reasons I love Ruger 1022. So many aftermarket parts. Now, different barrel, different stock. I have a different trigger and trigger components in there, different charging handle on here, different scope base on here. And then I've added a scope, I've added rings. So all that, there are so many choices. Now that is perhaps a problem as well, is it's very easy to quickly spend more on aftermarket parts than you do on the 1022 itself. And so if by chance you go to sell it, just a heads up for all my friends who have not shot a lot, you're not getting that money back, or at least not most of it. It's not uncommon for people to have a 1022 that they've changed a few components out, and now they've spent more on aftermarket parts than they did on the 1022 itself. And again, you're not recouping all those costs when you go to sell it, if you ever do sell it. So maybe that's not an issue for you. So if you're just looking for something, I'm going to shoot it just as it is. I'm never going to do anything else to it, and I want it to be pretty accurate. I don't care about a detachable magazine that comes out the bottom. I don't mind loading from this tube magazine. This is actually probably my choice. It's more accurate out of the box. Example for example, I've shot multiple of each of these, and especially a lot of the 1022s. And this Marlin Model 60 is probably more accurate than the 1022. However, I like the 1022 better because I do like to tinker with it, replace things, and they shoot well. They shoot well. So this is my recommendation. If you know I'm going to tinker with it, I'm going to play with it, I'm going to spend some money on it, I want to enjoy it and make it change configurations over the years. So those are my recommendations, a little bit understanding firearms, or 22 rifles. So hopefully all that makes sense. I know maybe for some of you that went through it really fast, and some probably like, I've known that since I was a kid. So these sort of rifles, single shot, made from the 50s or 60s, do they shoot well? Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert shot by any means, but this is a target from just the other day. This is open sights, so again, no scope or anything. at 25 yards. And again, this is not trophy quality, but this is 11 rounds here, all grouped together, pretty small. So to me, that's not bad for an old firearm, but it is single shot. So hopefully that answers most of your questions. And as far as understanding what you're looking for, if you're looking at buying a 22 rifle, the one parting comment I would make is, the question is, well, where do I buy it? Generally, I wouldn't, especially if this is your first firearm, I would steer away from just meeting someone on the internet that you don't know and buying one. One, is it stolen? Two, you might get taken. And three, a lot of times in the used market, firearms, people will try to advertise them and sell them for what they're going for brand new, if there is currently in production. But they will try to sell them for brand new prices. So in other words, you might end up overpaying unless you know what you're doing. So because you're saying this is your first one, it might be better for you not to buy used, unless it's from somebody you know and they're just telling you, hey, I bought it for $250, I'm going to sell it for $175 because I need the money. Then perhaps that might be a good deal for you if it's what you want. So I'm telling you, probably don't buy from an individual. You're going to buy, then you have two choices. You're going to buy from like a mom and pop, local gun shop, or you're going to go to a big box store, something like a Bass Pro, a Walmart, an Academy Sports. And none of those are necessarily bad choices. I would say if you're going to have questions and you want to talk through some things before you purchase, I'm going to recommend you go to a mom and pop shop, some local shop. My experience, at least here in the South, is when I go to mom and pop shop, one, I'm probably going to pay just a little bit more than I would at Academy or Bass Pro or Walmart. But the thing is, I'm going to have more hands-on with the firearm. They're going to let me do more what I want with it while I'm looking at it. And if you say, hey, I'm going to be honest, this is my first firearm. Can you kind of walk me through what I ought to know? I think this is what I want, but tell me more about it. They love to talk firearms, and they are more knowledgeable. Again, my experience here in the South where I live, I have bought firearms from big box stores and mom and pop shops. And 9 times out of 10, the mom and pop shops, the people behind the counter, and I say mom and pop, one of my favorite shops is the spouse, the wife who runs the counter the majority of the time, and she knows firearms and loves to talk about them. Will tell you anything you want to know about them. And it may be an hour-long purchase, but you're not rushed. They'll take an hour with you, let you look at it, think over it, think about it. It's just, again, what I'm going to recommend. Now, if you already know 100% what you want, you're not going to have any questions like, I've already decided, Ruger 1022 is what I want. There are a lot of choices on those too, by the way. But you can go to a big box store, and that'll be fine. But I'm going to recommend, probably for your first purchase, mom and pop shop. Especially because after the purchase, if you have an issue or you have a question, it's not what you thought, you're more likely to get service and questions answered at the mom and pop shop versus the big box store like an Academy, Bass Pro. Again, Bass Pro probably has a little more knowledgeable folks than some of the other experiences I've had. I will say I've been appalled just standing, not the one making a gun deal, but standing around where somebody from one of the big box stores is trying to educate someone who has never purchased a firearm before about what they should know. And their responses and answers to questions, again, where I am, the stores that I frequent, I've been shocked. I've been appalled at some of the answers that the person behind the counter, supposed to be knowledgeable at a big box store, the answers they're given, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, you're in the wrong place to be asking those kind of questions. So it's probably way longer than I expected it to be, but hopefully that kind of helps you decide, am I looking for open sights? Am I looking for dot sights? Am I looking for magnified scopes? Is the firearm going to get able to mount that? If I'm looking for a scope, I got to make sure that it can mount that. Do I want single shot? Do I want it to be bolt action, where I have to cycle the bolt each time, or repeater, where it holds more than one, but I have to cycle the bolt manually each time? Or do I want a semi-automatic, so after I charge it, every time I pull the trigger, release, the next round has already cycled its way in, and as soon as I press the trigger again, it fires the next round? Am I looking for new, used? Do I care that it's the looks of an old firearm with wood stock, or do I want plastic because it's going to get banged around a lot and I don't want it to get messed up? So those are some of the things to think through. If you have more questions, especially my friends that I'm really making this video for, hit me up. You can text me or email me. You guys know my my number, my email. Ask any questions that you have, or if there's a lot of general questions and you post them in the comments, be happy to make some videos that hopefully answer those questions as well.